But I'm just trying to understand how you're building your plates because carbs, they're down, protein moderate, high fat, but what does
Calorie
that look
wise,
like? What does that look like though? Give me examples of what your dinner plates might look like.
well, I will tend to choose like fattier cuts of meat. I eat, duck eggs. I'll eat bacon. Things that have a higher fat content to them. Um, I use animal fats, and I will use sometimes coconut oil or whatever, and I'll make salads with a lot of olive oil, all of that. So calorically, you know that that brings that brings the calories up. Um, and then it's kind of whatever I have. I live off grid, and you know I do grow and raise some of my own food. Um, Working on doing more of that, and I have the ability to hunt and fish and all of that kind of thing. But it's kind of like whatever I have available. Um, Sometimes it's like that show Chopped, I think it is, or whatever. I'm not a TV person, but I've watched a couple episodes of that where you've got gummy bears and French bread and this and that, and now you got to make something fancy out of it. And so as I find myself going through the fridge and finding stuff and just kind of putting things together. Um, I make my own sauces and my own salad dressings and things like that. Um, and so I like sauces. I do. Um, In fact, I'll probably be making a big pot of sort of a bone broth based soup, tonight, and it'll have the best grass fed ground beef I've ever had in my life, and then I'll maybe put some tomato puree in that and saute some onions in duck fat and add that to it, and just whatever from the garden, just kind of throw it in there. Um, it's really really good. Um, And I find, like, things with soups and whatever, I make a big pot of soup, and that feeds us for 2 or 3 days, you know? Um, I don't usually do anything with lunch. I'll usually eat kind of a late breakfast. I might have some coffee or some tea in the morning or something like that. I'll eat kind of a late breakfast. Um, and then I'm not really thinking about food. I mean, I live on a homestead, so I'm working all day long. Um And and then, late in the afternoon, I start thinking about preparing meal for dinner, and I try to, create as much variation and as much, variety of things, might maybe some greens from the garden, like last night there were tomatoes and marinated cucumbers on the plate and some, sautéed, greens and garlic um, and things like that, um, along with the amazing pork ribs that I had, but anyway, um, and it's intrinsically real satisfying, and it's not that complicated, really. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. So it's not like everything on my plate is swimming in fat. It glistens, but you know, there are plant foods on my plate. Um, they're not sugary or starchy. And although I do have I bought this property and had an amazing mature orchard, so I'll walk through and I'll grab a handful of blueberries or raspberries or grab a little plum off a tree or something now and again. But, um, I don't eat enough of that stuff to mess me up, It's just and there's never been a chemical on this property, so everything is really pristine and things are grown. Um, um incredibly cleanly. So I feel like incredibly fortunate to have what I do. And there's a lot of wild forage around here and stuff too. And a lot of the previous owner planted a ton of like food forest stuff. So nut trees of all different varieties. I've got almonds growing out there and hazelnuts and, just all kinds of things, pine nuts. Um, and so, um, yeah. And when it comes to feeding, my ducks, I probably 90% of their diet is wild forage. One thing I found is that, at first I'm thinking, well, I have to have something supplemental for them, like in the wintertime or whatever else, because they're not able, they don't migrate, and and there's a lot of snow and it's harder for them to forage. So I was looking at organic feeds, and what I discovered is that every organic feed made for poultry, and probably every animal that feed is made for, they all contain the allowable levels of literally toxic ingredients. And it's like, you're kidding me. Um, and so that was a rude awakening. So I literally assemble a bunch of different things that I put together and ferment for my ducks. I create my own feed for them because I don't trust what can be bought pre-manufactured. And it's that extra step, but boy, they love it and they do extremely well. And if you ferment the feed, you get 2/3 more nutrition and 1/3 the cost, you know. So it's a win-win all the way around. Um, I think that we've arrived at a time in history where it makes a lot of sense to not just have that firsthand knowing of where your food comes from, which is pretty important. You know, there are all sorts of horror videos out there about what people are finding in their store bought salmon or their meat or whatever else. I mean, who knows where some of it comes from? Uh, and So it makes sense not just to know where your food comes from, but to decentralize your access to food as much as possible. Yes, support your local farmer, but to the extent humanly possible, try to become your local farmer. You know, we've at the Price Pottinger Foundation, we've created something called the Food Freedom Project Initiative, which is not just about, um, well, how do you grow tomatoes and zucchini in your backyard? I mean, that's fine if you do that. You're not going to live on tomatoes and zucchini, right? And it's very, very hard for most people, even if they live in a rural setting, to do it all themselves, to get everything they need from their own space. I'm doing my level best to do it all here. It's not practical for 99% of people out there, or even feasible. So what it's about is not trying to become, you know, uh, Rambo, where you've got a wall full of buckets of beans and rice and ammo, and you're trying to tough it out on your own, or um, or to where you think that you have to do it all yourself. It's about finding people that live near you that you have a relationship with, friends, family, whatever, in your immediate area, getting together with them you know, and figuring out who has what, who can do what, you know? Like, even if you're just growing sprouts on your windowsill, at least you're doing something. Um, so and so over here might be really into hunting and fishing or whatever, and they go out and they come back with extra meat that can be shared. Maybe, Tiffany over here, she is great with tomatoes and zucchini, and then this other person here has chickens, or duck eggs, I don't know, or somebody's raising rabbits or goats, or somebody over here, they've got beef cattle, or um, and or this person over here who knows all about natural foraging, and coming together and figuring out, who can do what, and therefore there's a division of labor, but there's also something that's very natural to our species, which is just sort of a decentralized, localized system of food production and procurement that isn't reliant upon centralized systems that don't have our best interests at heart. Let's just say, to put it mildly. And so, we have one of the things we created when we first created the Food Freedom Project is something we call the Thanksgiving Challenge, and which is kind of a fun way of getting into it. And of course, we've got that time coming up in the not too distant future. Yeah, I better get the rest of my firewood assembled. But anyway, um, where rather than just going and buying your butterball turkey or whatever else, getting together with friends or family that you want to spend that holiday with, and figuring out how you can obtain locally or through your own efforts, whether growing or raising or whatever else, all the ingredients necessary to make that Thanksgiving dinner. Doesn't have to be turkey, it could be whatever. Um, and the exceptions could be, condiments and spices and things like that. Obviously, you're going to probably get those from other places, most of them. But to be able to put together a meal that is something that you and your friends or family put together yourselves from what was available in your immediate environment. And when you do that, number one, it's really fun to do. But once you've had that meal, you realize we've got this. We know how to do it. We know where to get different things. And it's not up to just any one person. We work together as in more of a community kind of form, which is so key to all of this. Food sovereignty is great, but and we should all have it, but not everybody can do everything themselves. So we need to, reach out a little more and be, we are a social tribal species. We're designed to do things that way. If you're trying, like the show Alone, I am a fan of that show. But these people go out, they are world-class experts at survival, right? World-class experts at primitive skills and knowing what to do, how to get food and water and stay warm and all of the things that they need to survive for an extended length of time by themselves out in the middle of nowhere. And it's really some of these people just really do have extraordinary skills and abilities. The most limiting factor that they all run into, almost all of them run into, the number one reason why most people end up, quote unquote, bugging out and dropping out of the competition doesn't have to do with the fact that, that they couldn't find food or water. It's loneliness. It's the lack of other human contact that they just can't deal with anymore. And we're really, we're designed to do things together. And when we work in a more of a community context, when we're working together like a social tribal species is meant to, life becomes a lot less complicated. There are divisions of labor that can be had, and different people are, this person's strength is maybe this person's weakness, so and vice versa, so that they can support each other and help each other get through difficult times. Developing maybe a bartering economy amongst yourselves and things like that. That's the economy of the future is a lot more of that, and it's also, as my friend Catherine Austin Fitts would say, relationships of trust. And we have to take those things into account as well.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
I do believe in relying on ketones and free fatty acids as a primary source of fuel. I think we're well designed to do that. We've always selectively hunted the fattest, sassiest animals. What we have between our ears has an enormous metabolic demand.